Amen. And it hadn't rained in 3 years. That's how our story begins today. And it hadn't rained in 3 years. We're going to be in 1 Kings chapter 18, verses 1 through 39 today. And this is one of my favorite stories in the Bible. Favorite stories in the Bible. And this passage finds us in the land of Israel, and it hasn't rained for 3 years. Now, with any story, you have to ask yourself the question, how did we get here? We have to know the context, the backstory. For instance, if you go and see the new Star Wars movie, you might, right? I know, amen. If you go see the new Star Wars movie, yes, it's self-contained enough to where you would say, oh, good movie, visually compelling, it was good. But it doesn't have the same meaning or significance or impact if you haven't watched the first 6 movies. Well, let's be honest, you don't have to watch the first 3, watch the middle 3. The first 3 are trash. But watch the middle 3. I know, preach. Okay. Wow, maybe I should just preach on Star Wars. People are really into it. All right, so you have to know the backstory. So that's what we have to do right now. Anytime you take a context or you take a verse or a passage in Scripture, it's fine to just teach on that passage in isolation, but it is better to see the full context and the backstory. So if you've noticed when I preach, I like to do that. So we're going to do that today. We're going to begin back in Exodus, and I've preached on this 2 times now, so this is going to be a very quick version. The children of Israel are enslaved in the land of Egypt, and the Lord hears their cry. As they cry out to God, he hears them, and he frees them from Egypt. And then he gives them a place, a purpose, and a promise. And he says, I'm going to lead you to this promised land. And so he leads them through the wilderness towards the promised land. Now, we talked about this a lot last time I preached, and I'm going to tell you, I told you basically last time that the people of Israel, when they're in the wilderness, they perpetually turn away from God, and they're perpetually disobedient. This week, I'm going to be a little more specific about how they did that. One of the things that always happened is Israel had this tendency towards idolatry. They would be in this wilderness, this scary place that was completely foreign to them, and they would get nervous, and they would get scared, and they would start to doubt God, and then they would start worshiping false gods and idols. Great example of this. I think the last 2 times I preached, I told you about Mount Sinai and how Moses goes up this mountain to speak to God. Well, I told you about what happened on top of the mountain, but what I didn't tell you the last 2 times is what happened at the base of the mountain while he was up there. And the children of Israel are waiting for Moses at the base of the mountain. And they're like, man, he sure has been up there a while. And they start getting nervous and they're like, oh my gosh, what if he, what if he doesn't come down? What if he just stays up there? Or what if he gets lost? Then we're going to be without a leader, without direction, and they get really scared. And so they're super nervous. So then, again, try to follow me here, but this is confusing. They go, oh my gosh, I got an idea. Okay, guys, follow me. We're going to take all the gold. Follow me. We're going to melt it down. Follow me. Then we're going to build an idol. Follow me. And then we're going to shape it like a calf. Still following? And then we're going to bow down to it. That was their plan. If it makes no sense, it's because it makes no sense. And if it's weird, it's because it's weird. And so they were like, and I mean, I'm sure some of them were like, how is that supposed to help us in this situation? We're going to bow down to it. It was like their answer for everything. They just always tended towards idolatry and worshiping false gods. It was their thing. So this persisted as they were going through the wilderness. But God, in his grace and his kindness, always is merciful towards them. And he still leads them through the wilderness into the promised land. And we talked last time I preached about when they're in the promised land, you're thinking, yes, this is a win. Everything's going to go so well. We finally arrived. This is great. Not so fast. Because the children of Israel, even in the promised land, after God had led them there, they still turned towards idols. And when they initially come into the promised land, they see all these peoples around them, these people groups with these big armies, and they start to get kind of nervous and kind of scared about it. And for some reason, they stop trusting God, who has provided for them all along the way, they stop trusting him and they go, we should worship false gods and we should make idols. It was their go-to move. And so they start doing that. And there's a cycle, especially in the book of Judges, where the people turn away from God and they worship idols and false gods. And then God in his kindness moves towards his people and he brings them out of whatever oppression they're in. And they go, thanks, God. We're scared again. And then they start bowing down to idols. It happens again and again and again. So then God is still patient and kind with his people. And he eventually makes them into this great nation, the most prominent nation in the area. And this guy, King Solomon, comes to power. And he is in a position where he can bless all the nations in the land at that time. And he has influence, he has military power, he's got a ton of money. And all the nations are actually coming to him to be like, dude, what is your secret? So they're in a really good situation here, really good position. And what does Solomon do? He begins to disobey the Lord. And all the things that were prescribed for a king to do, Solomon breaks all the rules. And he begins to, and we talked about this last time I preached, he begins to oppress his people. He begins to even enslave other peoples. And then he begins to make these foreign treaties. Now we think, oh, that's not so bad. But here's the thing. The Lord had called the people to not do that because he wanted the people to trust him rather than all these political endeavors of theirs or all these deals that they could make. So Solomon doesn't listen, and he makes all these treaties, and kind of like in medieval times, a lot of times part of a treaty is you would marry like a princess from a far-off land. So he married several of them. And so they ended up, it says in scripture that all of these wives that he collected, I lost count of how many, they lead him away into idol worship and worship of false gods. Well then, so the problem persists. Then a great-grandson, I don't know how many greats exactly, but it's way down the line. A grandson of his named King Ahab comes to power in the land of Israel, in the northern kingdom of Israel. And guess what Ahab does? The exact same thing. And he begins to act exactly like Solomon, and he begins to make all of these foreign treaties and collect all of these foreign wives to ensure those treaties. Because he thought, no, I'm gonna do things my way. I'm going to do my whole political thing of making all these treaties, and I'm going to protect myself. I don't care what God said about it. I'm in control. I'm in charge. So he ends up marrying this woman, Jezebel, and she was from this land of Sidon. She was a Sidonian, and he marries Jezebel. Now the problem with this is she begins to influence him to worship this false god named Baal. And we have a slide up there. Baal in Hebrew means Lord or Master. If you grew up in Sunday school, sometimes some people call it Baal. We're not used to having two vowel sounds together like that. It's Baal, and it means Lord or Master. Now the significance of that is one of the things they would call the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God that pulled them out of slavery in Egypt and led them through the wilderness and established them in the promised land, one of the things they would call him is Adonai, my Lord. So they were supposed to call the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob Adonai, my Lord. But instead, they start calling this false God Lord or Master. Now, in order for our story to make as much sense as possible, I need to tell you a couple things about Baal. So Baal, first of all, he was believed to be the god of the storm. So he was the rain god, he was the god of thunder and lightning. And because the society of the day was an agrarian society, very agriculturally based, they depended on the rain. They needed rain. And we're going to get at this a little more later, but rain was central to their worlds. Because, let's just say hypothetically, there's a drought. Well, if there's a drought, that means there's no rain, and then that means the crops won't grow, so we won't have food, and we won't be able to trade crops, and then animals won't have food to eat, so they'll die, and then we can't eat the animals, so everything is wrecked. And so basically the rain, if you didn't have rain, it would wreck your economy. So we think like no rain, we're like, oh man, they must have been really thirsty. No, like it wrecked their economy. So in fear, a lot of times people were like, well, oh my gosh, if we don't have rain, our economy's gonna be wrecked and we won't have enough. And then they thought, okay, I know what we can do. We can start worshiping this God of the storm, this God of rain and thunder and lightning. And because it was believed that Baal would send the rain, The rain made the ground fertile, so he was also viewed as the fertility god. He made the ground fertile so that crops would grow, so the economy would be sustained. So it was very attractive to the people who struggled with fear and insecurity to have this god who were like, this guy will provide rain for us. The second thing you need to know about Baal, in consistency with this, is this cult worship developed around Baal. And people thought, I know, we can manipulate this god. We can kind of control him in a way. So what they would do is they would build these altars and these temples, and they would lay stone, and they would put firewood on top, and then they would take an animal sacrifice, and they would put it on the altar, and they would burn it, and they would hope that the fragrance would go up to Baal, smells delicious, and rouse his attention. I try not to mention food in a sermon because, lunch is immediately after, and people are like, I got a rumbly in my tummy already. We'll get there, don't worry. So the smell is going up to Baal, and the people thought, that would rouse his interest. And so then he would be pleased with us, and he would send rain. So first of all, they were misguided, recognizing Baal as the storm god, the god of rain and of lightning. But second of all, honestly, it was kind of a means of control. They're like, we can kind of manipulate this god. So all we have to do is a couple of things here that will get his attention, and he'll send rain. So really, who did they think was in charge? Them. And they wanted this control. So that's what you need to know about Baal worship. So there's a lot of other detestable practices, but I decided not to go into them. So Ahab is in the land with his wife Jezebel, and she has misled him into worshiping this false god Baal. And this is not okay. And so the Lord calls this guy named Elijah, this prophet Elijah. Now, this is going to be significant later on. Elijah, names are very significant in the Old Testament, and his name means, my God is Yahweh. And so in this story, there's going to be kind of a contest of who is really God. And so his name is very significant here, Elijah, my God is Yahweh. And so the Lord calls Elijah, and he says, go to King Ahab and call him out, because this is what a prophet does in the Old Testament. So Elijah goes to Ahab and Jezebel, and he says, as surely as I stand here, there will be neither dew nor rain until I say so. Now, he's basically pronouncing a drought. Why a drought? Why is that the punishment for here? Why didn't God punish them in some other way? Because of their economy, they're dependent on the rain. And who did they think, so this is a question for you guys, who did they think sent the rain? That's right, gold star. So in a way, Elijah was just saying, listen, I know you think Baal sends the rain, but I'm going to show you who really sends the rain. And I know you think Baal is Lord, but I'm going to show you who's really Lord. And then he drops the mic and walks away. Because that's how they did it in the Bible. And then it hadn't rained in 3 years. It hadn't rained in 3 years. Getting back to the significance of a drought. So their economy was starting to tank. And they were starting to get really nervous about having food for the next year. There's a lot of historical accounts. I mean, this is even outside of the Bible. In the Near East, of when there was famine and when there was drought, because the two were always correlated, a lot of times people would get so desperate, they would start thinking, we might have to start eating each other, which is super morbid. But that's the state of affairs at this point, after 3 years. So then after 3 years, the Lord taps Elijah on the shoulder again, ding, 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 and he says, go back to Ahab and confront him. So Elijah, still being faithful, still being obedient, heads to confront Ahab. Now what Elijah doesn't know, and this is a whole side story we don't have time for, is Ahab was actually looking for him at the time. So there's going to be this massive standoff here. So Elijah's heading towards Ahab, and Ahab is heading towards Elijah, and they meet somewhere in the middle, and Ahab sees Elijah, and he says, oh, there you are, oh troubler of Israel. Now the word troubler here, you're like, dude, that's a lame insult. The word here, oker, it basically means one who brings chaos. Because Ahab was basically blaming Elijah for all the chaos that took place in the land at this time. So he says, oh, there you are, oh troubler of Israel. And so Elijah says, I'm troubler of Israel? No, sir. You are the troubler of Israel. You and your daddy's house who led all the people away into false worship of Baal. No, sir. You are the troubler of Israel. Time out real quick. This is basically the biblical form of trash talk. And as a pastor, I should say, but as myself, I love it and think it's awesome. Okay, so we're back to the story. Real talk. So there's a standoff here. So then Elijah decides to confront the people because this crowd had gathered around to see this. So, I mean, just think of like the Super Bowl or something like that. There's a crowd of people. And so Elijah says, hold up, I'm going to address the crowd. So you guys are going to be the children of Israel, okay? That's your role to play in the story. And Elijah asks this question. He says, how long will you waver between two opinions? Now, we're going to go into a little Hebrew here because there's some layers of meaning here. There's some wordplay. This is geniusly written. So the word used here for waver, in Hebrew it's this word pasak, okay? It means Passover. So the same word is used, if you're familiar with the story, back in Exodus, during the Passover, where the angel of death passes over the houses that have the blood over the doorpost. That is the same word, pasak, to pass over. That same word is used here, pasak. Now, you can have this connotation of passing over. So you could say, how long are you going to pass over from one side to the next? So it's like they're not putting their feet down, they're not being established anywhere, they're just passing over, passing through. There's a second connotation that a lot of scholars theorize about, and they say this actually should be translated as limping. You're limping from one side to the next. So when I read that and when I was studying this, I was like, that sounds weird and doesn't make a lot of sense in English. But if you think about it, the people had this inability to make a definitive step in one direction or the other. It's like, we're going to go this way, but like, also we're going to go to like Baal worship, and we're going to come over here. Whoa, I almost tripped, watch out. There's not even anything there. All right. So they'd be like, we're going to go this way, but now we're going to head back in this direction. And so they couldn't make a definitive move one way or the other. So that's what some scholars think is kind of the connotation here. So you can read this. A lot of translations go with waver, but you could say, how long will you pass over from one side to the next? Or how long will you limp back and forth between two different sides? He's basically telling them, be definitive, make a decision, quit vacillating. There's also one last little wordplay in Hebrew here. The word used for side between two sides, it's actually sa'afim, and it can actually mean crutches, like the word crutches. So you could say, how long will you pass over between two sides? But you could also translate this legitimately as saying, how long will you limp between two crutches? It's like the people can't put their feet down and make a decision. So then Elijah says, listen, if Baal is your God, then follow him by all means. But if you believe Yahweh, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is God, then would you please follow him? And so he's calling people to task on this. So now I need your guys' interaction. You guys are going to have a line. This first line is really easy. So he throws it out there and he says, make a decision. And the people say, hold on, not yet, hold on. There we go. The people say, silence. Man, you're not supposed to say silence. You're supposed to be silent. Sorry. Couldn't have planned that any better. So get together, Matt. The people are completely silent. And I'm sure everyone's looking around like, you gonna answer? Answer? And so Elijah waits for their answer. And he waits for their answer. And so finally, he breaks the silence and he says, oh my gosh. And you see Elijah get frustrated here. I love this part. He goes, ugh. Lo, I am the only remaining prophet of the Lord in Israel, while the prophets of Baal are 450 strong, and of Baal's perceived girlfriend, Asherah, 400. So Elijah is frustrated at this point. He's like, so no one is with me. I am the only remaining prophet of the Lord, while the prophets of Baal and Asherah are 450 and 400. Time out here. This isn't exactly where I'm going with the sermon, but I wanted to make a quick note here. This whole situation that Elijah finds himself in, I get it. Like, right? There's been a lot of times in my life where I've been frustrated a little bit, where I'm like, really? am I the only one doing this thing anymore? And so I know a lot of you are probably in that situation, maybe in your families, your work, friends, wherever. Maybe you're feeling like, man, sometimes literally I feel like the only one. So we can kind of take comfort in the story that those who have gone before us have gone through the same thing. Time in. All right, so Elijah's frustrated. So then Elijah gets an idea, and he proposes a contest. So he's confronted Ahab, he's confronted the people of Israel, so now he confronts the prophets of Baal. And he says, I'd like to propose to you a contest. We're going to build 2 altars, lay the firewood on top, lay the sacrifice on top. And then each of us will pray to our respective gods. And the God who answers with fire from heaven, that is the true God. Now, when I say fire from heaven, some of you guys are thinking, okay, now this is sounding ridiculous. Let me just ask you this. Back in the day, they didn't really have developed science like we had today. If they were trying to describe, let's just say, a lightning bolt, how do you think they would describe that? Fire from heaven, probably. And now, why would Elijah ask for a sign of fire from heaven? Because who did they think controlled the lightning? Baal. So if Baal, he hasn't sent rain. Oh, he's a lightning god too. Okay. So let's see if he sends lightning. Fair enough. And so he proposes this contest. And then you guys have another line coming up. You can actually say this one. All right. And he says, what do you guys think? And the people say? Yeah, that was an easier translation than what it actually is. But yeah, sounds good. Okay, one more time. What do you guys think? All right, let's do it then. And so Elijah says, he looks at the prophets of Baal and he says, you first. So the prophets of Baal, they lay the wood on the altar and they lay the animal sacrifice on there. Now in this section, there's going to be a lot of symmetry and a lot of parallelism. It's brilliantly written. And it says that they cry out to their God. It's this word in Hebrew, chara. They chara to their God. No voice, no answer. And that's what it says in the text. No voice, no answer. So then they get a little nervous and they're like, okay. And depending on what translation you read, it says that they began to limp around the altar or they began to dance around the altar. Now, fascinatingly enough, the verb used here is pasach, which is the same verb that was used when Elijah confronts the people and says, how long will you pasach, pass over or limp between 2 sides? Same word is used here. However, it is an intensified form of the verb. So a lot of scholars write about this and how to best translate it. One meaning could be, and again, there's always ranges of meanings here, that they literally leapt upon the altar. So like literally they laid themselves on the altar and they're like, come on! If it seems desperate, it's because it's desperate. If it seems weird, it's because it's weird. Another connotation could be that they began to limp around the altar, which again, to us, we're like, what is with this? That makes no sense to me. A lot of scholars say that this was some kind of ceremonial dance that they started doing around the altar. So I don't know what that dance looked like they're moving forward and backwards like limping. So I think it's like the Charlie Brown dance, you know? Okay, so they start doing some dance around the altar. And so Elijah sees this and he goes, I gotta make jokes about this. And so Elijah decides to start talking trash. Now, you might hear that and go, that doesn't sound biblical. The word in Hebrew is literally to mock. He began to mock them. Now, I'm not going to go into all of what he says, but I'm going to start with the first 2 because they're the most controversial. He says, and it depends on what translation, he says, perhaps he is deep in thought. Perhaps your God, maybe he's deep in thought or busy. You'll see in the ESV it says, perhaps he is musing or relieving himself. Okay, right? So I decided to research this because that's who I am. So I read some scholarly journal articles about this. And there's 2 words used here. The first one is siach, and the second one is sig. And siach usually means busyness. And sig can be translated withdrew to a private place. But scholars have analyzed other languages in this region at the time, the Ugaritic text and Arabic text, and the same words that kind of stem from the same language, they mean going to the bathroom. So a lot of scholars say what he's actually saying here is maybe your God is going to the bathroom. So he's talking trash, people. Then he says, oh, no, you know what, maybe I'm being ridiculous about that. Hey guys, maybe he's sleeping. Maybe you need to wake him up and tell him to put his shoes on, you're at grandma's house. And the prophets of Baal start to get insulted, and they're like, we know our God's not sleeping. We're not a bunch of idiots. Come on, guys. And Elijah's like, you guys just make it so easy. So he taunts them. So then they begin to get frustrated. And they come up with one last desperate scheme. And this gets real. They take out their swords and they begin cutting themselves, trying to get Baal's attention. And it says they start beating themselves with their swords and cutting themselves. And then one more time, just like at the beginning of this passage, it says that they cry out, they hurrah to Baal. No voice, no answer. And so Elijah says, my turn. So Elijah tells the people, come to me, come with me, come on, gather around. Now I know I have an altar built here, but the text indicates that he actually had to rebuild the altar to the Lord. Now that's how bad the religious situation was in the land at this time. There wasn't even an altar to sacrifice to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It didn't even exist. Here's a good analogy. It's not like the children of Israel were not going to church. It's that there were no churches. Okay? You feel me on that one? There was nothing. So Elijah has to take up the task of rebuilding this altar. And he rebuilds it. Don't count how many bricks are here, but for the purposes of the story, follow me. He rebuilds it using 12 stones, a stone to represent each tribe of Israel. And as he's building this altar, he begins to tell a little bit of Israel's story. And he begins to remind them of who they are and where they came from. And he begins to talk about their identity. And he's trying to point out to the people, look, we're going to sacrifice to the true God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the one who has provided for us all along the way. He's the one that's been with us in Egypt, the wilderness, in the promised land, and he's the one that still provides for us today. So he's telling them about their identity. So then, Elijah decides, as a true test of God's might and strength, he says, listen guys, I'm going to actually make this a little more difficult. I'm going to have them dig a trench around the altar, and I'm going to have them pour water over the altar, and then I'll ask for God to send fire from heaven. So he has these dudes build a trench around the altar. And then he has them take, now if you read this in your Bible, some say vessels, 4 vessels, some say 4 jars. Actually, the word, it's kadim mayam, and kadim basically means pails, like huge pails of water. He has them take 4 of these and dump them over the altar, over the animal sacrifice, the firewood, the bricks, and into the trench around the altar. 4 of these huge pails of water. And he has them do this 3 times. Time out. Quick math break. What is 4 times 3? Nailed it. Okay, so 12 times he has them do this. 12 huge pails of water. Again, this kadim mayam, there's these big pails of water. It's not like a little jar, like, here you go, a little water in the fire. I mean, we're talking big pails of water. Now, 2 things about this. If you're trying to light some firewood, if it's drenched with water, will it light? That is correct. It will not. The other thing is as they put 12 of these pails of water on the altar, what was going on in the land at this time? Great job. A drought. So we read that and they're like, oh man, that's going to make it hard to light the firewood. The people would have been going, what are you doing? Are you crazy? We don't have any water left. Are you insane? That may be our last water, you dummy. And so they start freaking out because this was a huge deal. There was no water left in the land and he was wasting 12 pails of it. How much faith did that take on Elijah's part? To basically waste, in their opinion, 12 huge pails of water when it was such a precious commodity at the time. So all the water is poured over the firewood and the stones, and so much that it fills up the trench that they dug around the altar. And then Elijah decides to pray to the Lord. And he says, let it be known, and he's praying to God, he says, let it be known this day that you are God of Israel. And so he rouses the people's attention. And he makes this epic prayer. He says, answer me, O Lord, so that these people will know that you are God and that you are turning their hearts back to you. Whew. That's praying with a lot of chutzpah. That is a strong prayer. I kind of feel like a coward sometimes when I pray. I'm like, dear Jesus, thank you for my family and my food. And he's like, hear me, God. It's an epic prayer. And so he says, answer me, because Baal didn't answer his prophets. No voice, no answer. Elijah says, answer me, O God, so that these people, 2 reasons, will know that you are God and that you are turning their hearts back to you. And he steps away. And then all of a sudden, fire falls from heaven. And it says that the fire burned up the animal sacrifice, and it burned up the firewood, and it burned up the stones. And then it said it licked up all the water in the trench. And so, as fire falls, the people fall on their face in repentance and in humility. So I need everyone here to, no, I'm just kidding, don't fall on your face. Gotcha. And then the people, this is where I do need your response, and the people respond, ready? Go for it. Let me hear it again. All right, now like you really mean it. Beautifully done. And that's where the story ends. And a couple of verses later, 3 years, and it hadn't rained in 3 years. And the Lord finally sends the rain. Now you hear that story, and you might think, cool story, Matt, but like, I don't know, kind of archaic, kind of irrelevant. I mean, it's not like we build altars today and like sacrifice things on them and turn away from God to worship all these false gods. It's not like we cut ourselves to try to get the attention of some far-off deity. I mean, please. To which I would say, really? I think this story is extremely relevant today. And I would suggest that we often find ourselves between 2 altars, in that we tend to pass over from one side to the next, or to limp back and forth between both. And hopefully, it doesn't take a drought to make us realize who's really in control. So, I ask you today, which altar are you at? Are you so concerned about your economy and your well-being and your security and your provision that you seek to control it all yourself, and you're obsessed with it, and everything gets sacrificed on this altar? Your time and your attention and your finances and your affection and your family, and everything goes on that altar? Or do you realize that all those things are good and they are gifts, and you trust them to the one who gave them to you and the one who's provided all along the way? Now, why is that so hard to do? Because we hear that and we're like, yeah, we should be at that altar. But then you're like, yeah, but also like this one. I like this one. This is the problem. I suggest this is difficult for 2 reasons. Fear and control. I think a lot of times, because life is uncertain and the future is uncertain, we have great fear. And because of that fear, just like the children of Israel, is it going to come down? I'm scared. We try to grasp for control, and we get frantic. We're like, I need to control everything. I got to figure it out. Just like the children of Israel did, I think we struggle with that same thing. And sometimes, unfortunately, it does take a drought to make us realize who's really in control. Now, this is a sermon for a different day to tell you the full story, so I'm just going to tell you a very abridged version to it. About 6 years ago, I, ironically, was diagnosed with an undiagnosed autoimmune disease. I went to like 1,000 different doctors, went to Mayo Clinic for a long time. They couldn't figure it out. I basically tried everything. And I started basically every system in my body started like shutting down slowly. And I basically started losing control of how I was functioning. Even to the point where I was getting really bad neuropathy and I couldn't even feel my legs. So like there were certain things where I was like having a hard time doing them because I couldn't feel my legs. Or like I couldn't sleep still at night because I'd have shooting pains in my arms and I would kind of like writhe a little bit, which was, it's kind of embarrassing. And I started losing control, even so much to the point that, because there was nerve damage, the nerve right above my heart kind of shorted out, so my heart wouldn't even beat normally. So I had to go get a pacemaker. And it's really scary when you feel things, your control start to slip away. And I think as people, we tend to hold on to things really tight. We're like, I got my control. And I think sometimes God starts taking our control away, and then we feel super vulnerable. And that's a scary place to be. But I would suggest to you today that sometimes it's a very healthy and wonderful place to be because it opens you up a little bit. On my journey with this illness, I've met other sojourners wrestling with the same thing, on the same path. And people who live with illness or who are fighting infirmity, they have this different kind of feel to them, this different kind of energy. They seem to just be more open. I don't see them really stressed out and trying to control everything. And especially if they're Christ followers and they're walking with the Lord, I feel like they're just very accepting. And I think whenever your control is taken away and a lot of things are taken away from you, you realize it's not about possession, it's about reception. And you start to realize that it is all a gift to begin with from a very kind and generous Heavenly Father who has provided for us all along the way. And so sometimes in life, when you feel like you don't have that control, it kind of forces you to bring yourself to the altar of the Lord and to just throw all your hopes and cares and fears and anxieties and uncertainties on this altar and give them up to the Lord and to let go. And the wonderful thing is, that's kind of where you were supposed to be the whole time. And so I would say, if you are struggling today with things in your life that are feeling out of control, or you're trying to hold fast to something that you can't really hold fast to, give it up to the Lord, man, because that's what you're supposed to be doing the whole time. And lose yourself in God's greatness and in awe and wonder of a very kind and generous and benevolent Heavenly Father who has provided for us all along the way. So may you this day realize where you are living between two altars. May you not vacillate from one side to the other, but may you take all your cares and concerns and put them upon the altar of the Lord, and may you turn your heart to God and know that the Lord, He is God. So whatever happens in life, whether death or life or job loss or sickness, the Lord, He is God. And I want to go back to that slide where the people of Israel react. So we're going to end by practicing this. So when you face these difficult situations in life, and you walk with your brothers and sisters through these times where it's uncertain, it's scary, and you don't have control, may you, like the children of Israel in the story, say, what'd you say? One last time, people. Grace and peace to you, Hope Church.